I'm 58 years old, Agnes Harrington, a retired elementary school teacher who lost her husband 7 years ago. This Christmas, I spent days preparing a perfect holiday dinner for my only son, Thomas, his wife, Stephanie, and my precious grandchildren. My hands trembled with excitement, arranging my mother's china on the dining table. I never imagined my carefully prepared feast would end with those crushing words from my only son's lips. "You are no longer a member of our family." Before I tell you how my world collapsed that Christmas evening, please take a moment to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Your support means everything to me. For 32 years, I taught 5th grade at Westbrook Elementary in our Connecticut suburb. My students and their parents still recognize me at the grocery store sharing stories about how I helped shape their lives. But my greatest pride was always being Thomas's mother. Raising him alone wasn't easy after Frank's sudden heart attack during Thomas's sophomore year of high school. One moment, we were a complete family planning college visits for our bright son, and the next, I was a widow at 41, solely responsible for our mortgage and Thomas's future. I took extra tutoring jobs on weekends and summers to ensure Thomas could attend the university of his dreams. Some nights after grading papers until midnight, I would peek into his room and find comfort in his peaceful sleep, knowing every sacrifice was worthwhile. He was such a sensitive boy, always making handmade Mother's Day cards that I still keep in my bedside drawer. The financial strain was constant. I remember telling Thomas we couldn't afford the senior class trip to Washington and then secretly selling my grandmother's pearl necklace to surprise him with the permission slip and spending money. The joy on his face was worth every pearl. When Thomas graduated with his business degree, I sat in that audience bursting with pride. He was the first in our family to finish college. His job offers came quickly, his intelligence and charm opening doors I could only dream about. I watched my son transform from that thoughtful boy into a successful man with a corner office and company car. But that transformation came with unexpected changes. Each visit home, Thomas seemed to grow more critical of my modest 3-bedroom house, the one where he'd grown up catching fireflies in the backyard and sledding down our driveway after snowstorms. "Mom, when are you going to update this place? These cabinets must be from the 1980s, he would say, running his finger along my kitchen counter with a slight grimace. I would laugh it off, reminding him that his childhood artwork still hung on our refrigerator. His smile never quite reached his eyes when I mentioned those memories. Thomas met Stephanie during his final year of college at a charity fundraiser. She came from the kind of wealth that seemed like fiction to me: summer homes, European vacations, and private schools. The first time Thomas brought her home, I spent 3 days cleaning and borrowed serving platters from my sister Julie to impress her. Stephanie arrived in designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, air-kissing my cheek and handing me a bottle of wine that I later discovered cost over $100. Throughout dinner, she picked at my homemade lasagna, Thomas's favorite childhood dish, while subtly examining everything in my home with an appraising eye. "What a quaint home," she said, emphasizing quaint in a way that made it sound like a synonym for outdated. Thomas has told me so much about growing up here. I tried building bridges, asking about her family and interests. Her answers were polite, but distant, ending conversations rather than extending them. When I showed her Thomas's baby photos, she glanced at them briefly before checking her phone. After they married in a lavish ceremony where I felt like an awkward outsider despite being the mother of the groom, the distance grew. Each family gathering became more strained. My suggestions about child rearing when my grandchildren came along were met with tight smiles and quick subject changes. "We're following Dr. Hamilton's methods," Stephanie would say whenever I offered advice. "He's written several books on modern parenting approaches." The grandchildren became unwitting pawns in our strained relationship. I was allowed to see them during structured visits, but spontaneous grandma days became rare. When I called to invite them for weekend sleepovers, there were always conflicts: piano lessons, language immersion classes, or playdates with the children of Stephanie's equally wealthy friends. This past year, the communication dwindled to almost nothing. My calls went to voicemail. Text messages received brief responses hours or days later. Birthday invitations for the grandchildren arrived the day after the parties. I learned about family vacations through social media posts, trips I hadn't been told about, much less invited to join. Each night, I would sit on my back porch staring at the swing set Thomas and Frank had built together, now unused and slowly rusting. The fear that I was losing my only family grew like a shadow stretching longer with each passing month. By October, I'd started planning this Christmas with desperate determination. This holiday would bridge the growing gap between us. I began putting aside money from my pension checks, skipping my weekly lunch with former colleagues, and canceling my basic cable subscription to afford special gifts and premium ingredients. I spent evenings researching recipes that might impress Stephanie, practicing a complicated chocolate soufflé 10 times until I could make it perfectly. Thomas had loved chocolate desserts as a child, and I hoped to reawaken that memory. The guest bedroom, which had gradually become my crafting space over the years of infrequent visits, was completely transformed. I bought new sheets with characters from my grandchildren's favorite movies' nightlights that projected stars on the ceiling and stuffed animals arranged carefully on each pillow. I even found special holiday books to read together, imagining cozy bedtime moments, reconnecting with my grandchildren. Shopping for gifts took weeks of careful consideration. Despite my limited budget, I wanted each present to feel personal and thoughtful. For Thomas, I found a first edition copy of his favorite childhood book at an antique store. I'd been making payments on it since August. For Stephanie, I selected a silk scarf in her favorite color, along with a spa gift certificate. For each grandchild, I created memory books filled with photos and stories from our family history, hoping to strengthen their connection to their roots. The week before Christmas, I barely slept. Every surface in my home was scrubbed until it gleamed. I climbed on step stools to dust ceiling fans and got on my hands and knees to clean baseboards, ignoring the protest of my aging knees. The physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in my heart when I imagined Thomas's family walking away for good. As I unpacked holiday decorations, each ornament unearthed a memory. The clay handprint Thomas made in 2nd grade. The glittery paper star from his first school Christmas pageant. The angel tree topper Frank had surprised me with our first Christmas as newlyweds. I arranged them all, creating a visual history of our family's love. My dining table was set with my mother's china, the delicate floral pattern that had graced every important family occasion for generations. I hand-washed each piece, polished the silver that rarely left its felt-lined box, and pressed my grandmother's lace tablecloth until every wrinkle surrendered. Each place setting included handwritten name cards and a small wrapped gift beside each plate. Late into Christmas Eve, I wrapped the main presents, attaching cards expressing my deepest feelings. To Thomas, "You will always be my greatest gift." To Stephanie, "Thank you for making my son happy." To each grandchild, messages of unconditional love and promises of adventures together. My fingers trembled with hope as I tied each ribbon, praying this Christmas would heal the fractures in our family. Christmas morning arrived with a gentle snowfall that blanketed our neighborhood in picturesque white. I woke before dawn, too anxious to sleep, and began the day's cooking marathon. The turkey, a splurge at 20 pounds, went into the oven first. Homemade rolls rose on the counter, potatoes waited for mashing, and vegetables were chopped with precision. Around noon, while checking the turkey's temperature for the 3rd time, I discovered a heart-stopping problem. The meat thermometer showed the turkey cooking too slowly. Would it be ready in time? I adjusted the temperature, calculating and recalculating cooking times, fighting back tears of frustration. Everything needed to be perfect. While fretting over side dishes, I found Thomas's childhood stocking in the decoration box. The sight of his name in glittery letters, now slightly faded, brought a wave of emotions so powerful I had to sit down. I traced my finger over the letters, remembering the Christmas mornings when he'd race downstairs to find it filled with small treasures. At 1 o'clock, my phone rang. Thomas's name appeared on the screen, sending my heart racing. "Mom!" His voice sounded distant professional. "We're running late. We'll be there around 4. "The turkey should stay warm," I said, swallowing disappointment. "Drive safely in the snow." "Right," he replied. No explanation for the delay, no apology. "See you soon." The extra hours dragged by as I fussed over every detail, changing my outfit twice and refreshing my makeup. When the doorbell finally rang at 4:30, I rushed to answer, composing my face into a welcoming smile. Thomas stood on my porch, wearing an expensive wool coat, Stephanie beside him, in a designer outfit, the grandchildren arranged in front of them, like a perfect family portrait. No one moved to hug me immediately. Thomas nodded formally, as though I were a business associate rather than his mother. "Merry Christmas," I said, voice wavering slightly. "Please come in from the cold." As they entered, I noticed Stephanie's eyes scanning my decorations, her slight frown at the homemade ornaments and traditional garlands. The children, usually running to see the presents, stayed uncharacteristically close to their parents. "Children, greet your grandmother properly," Stephanie instructed, her tone suggesting a rehearsed interaction rather than a warm family greeting. My grandchildren stepped forward one by one, offering stiff hugs that broke my heart. 8-year-old Emma, 6-year-old James, and 4-year-old Lily, normally bubbling with energy and stories, stood solemn and watchful, glancing at their parents after each interaction as if seeking approval. As I helped take their coats, I overheard Thomas whispering to Stephanie in the hallway. "Let's just get through this," he said. "A few hours, that's all." Their conversation stopped abruptly when I rounded the corner, Stephanie's smile snapping back into place like a mask. My stomach nodded, but I pushed aside my concerns and led everyone to the living room, where the Christmas tree lights twinkled invitingly. The gift exchange before dinner felt like a business transaction rather than a family celebration. I watched eagerly as my grandchildren unwrapped the presents I'd chosen with such care. "Thank you, grandmother, for the book about our family," Emma said, her words polished and clearly rehearsed. She barely glanced at the carefully crafted pages showing photos of her father as a child, of her grandfather, whom she barely remembered. James and Lily followed with similarly formal thanks, their eyes darting to their parents after each gift as though seeking approval. The memory books, stuffed animals, and handmade scarves were set aside quickly, nothing examined in detail or appreciated. When it was my turn to open gifts, Thomas handed me a small envelope. Inside was a gift card to a department store with a generic pre-printed message. No personal note, no acknowledgement of our shared history or the upcoming year. "We weren't sure what you needed," Stephanie explained, checking her expensive watch for the 3rd time in 20 minutes. This seemed most practical. I noticed my handmade gifts to Thomas and Stephanie remained wrapped, set aside for later. Thomas's phone rang twice during our exchange, and both times he stepped away to take the calls, speaking in his authoritative work voice about quarterly projections and client meetings. On Christmas Day. At 5:30, I invited everyone to the dining room, my heart pounding with anticipation and growing dread. The table looked beautiful, candles casting a warm glow over the feast I'd spent days preparing. The golden brown turkey centered the table, surrounded by all the traditional sides: stuffing, cranberry sauce, sweet potato casserole, and green bean casserole made from scratch. "Everything looks lovely," Thomas said without enthusiasm, helping Stephanie to her seat. "I made your favorite cornbread stuffing," I told him, serving his plate personally. "And remembered that Stephanie prefers white meat." Stephanie nodded curtly, examining her plate. "I'm actually trying to limit carbs these days," she said, pushing aside the stuffing I'd spent hours making. The children's initial excitement at the spread was quickly tempered by sharp glances from their mother. Little Lily reached eagerly for a homemade roll, but Stephanie intercepted her hand. "Just half, Lily. We don't want to ruin your appetite for healthier options." Thomas barely touched the food he had once loved, taking small, disinterested bites between glances at his phone beneath the table. The special cranberry sauce made from his grandmother's recipe sat untouched on his plate. "The recipe seems a bit dated," Stephanie commented after taking a small taste. "Most people use less sugar these days. Health concerns, you know." I tried steering the conversation toward happy memories, hoping to spark connection. "Remember the Christmas when you were 10, Thomas? You got that bicycle you wanted so badly and insisted on riding it despite the snow." "Vaguely," Thomas replied, not looking up from his plate. The story of him racing down the driveway, falling into a snowbank, and laughing until tears froze on his cheeks. Once a favorite family tale, dismissed in a single word. I turned to the children. "What was your favorite gift this morning?" Before they could answer, Stephanie intervened. "They received educational tablets that will help advance their reading and math skills. Learning shouldn't take holidays." My questions about school activities, friends, and hobbies were answered primarily by Stephanie, not the children themselves. Thomas checked emails throughout dinner, occasionally nodding absently at the conversation. Uncomfortable silences grew longer between my increasingly desperate attempts at meaningful interaction. The cheerful Christmas music playing softly in the background only emphasized the lack of joy at the table. With each passing minute, my certainty grew that something was deeply, irreparably wrong. As I brought out the chocolate soufflé I'd practiced making 10 times, Thomas cleared his throat and exchanged a significant look with Stephanie. My hands trembled slightly as I set the dessert on the table, recognition dawning that the moment I'd been dreading had arrived. "Children," Stephanie said firmly, "please go to the living room and play with your tablets for a while. The adults need to talk." My grandchildren slid from their chairs without question, taking their devices and disappearing quickly. Thomas straightened in his chair, assuming what I recognized as his business posture. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised, expression neutral but authoritative. My heart raced as I took my seat again, hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their shaking. The soufflé, perfect in its presentation, sat untouched as Thomas prepared to speak. Thomas pushed back his chair and stood looking down at me with an expression I'd never seen directed my way before. Detached, almost clinical, as if addressing a difficult employee rather than his mother. "We need to discuss the future of our family relationships." He began, his voice steady and rehearsed. "Stephanie and I have been holding family meetings over the past few months to evaluate various aspects of our lives and make important decisions about moving forward." Family meetings I'd never been invited to or even informed about. I felt a cold sensation spreading through my chest as I realized how deliberately I'd been excluded. "We've been assessing which relationships and influences are beneficial for our children and our family's future social positioning." He continued, using corporate language that felt jarringly out of place at Christmas dinner. "We've had to make some difficult decisions based on our long-term family goals." I sat perfectly still, hands now gripping my napkin beneath the table as Thomas listed perceived grievances against me. Intrusions into their parenting decisions, my outdated values that conflicted with their modern approach, my modest home and lifestyle that didn't reflect their social aspirations. "Your constant reminiscing about the past undermines our focus on the future," Thomas said, as if remembering his childhood was somehow harmful. "And frankly, your teaching background and middle-class sensibilities are becoming increasingly incompatible with the social circles we're establishing for ourselves and the children." Each word landed like a physical blow. This wasn't my son speaking. These were Stephanie's judgments in Thomas's voice. I could see her nodding slightly beside him, affirming each point. Then came the devastating conclusion. Thomas straightened his shoulders and delivered the line that would echo in my nightmares for months to come. "We voted, and you are no longer a member of our family." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Surely I had misheard. People don't vote family members out of existence. Parents can't be discarded when inconvenient. The grandchildren I had loved since before they took their first breaths couldn't be taken from me through some twisted family ballot. "Thomas," I whispered, barely finding my voice. "What are you saying?" "It means we're creating clear boundaries." He clarified, his business tone unwavering. This arrangement isn't working for us anymore. I felt as though I was outside my body watching this scene unfold from above. Memories flashed rapidly. Thomas taking his first steps across our kitchen floor, his small hand in mine on his first day of kindergarten, his tear-streaked face when he fell from his bike and came running to me for comfort. How had that little boy become this cold stranger? What have I done wrong? I managed to ask, my voice breaking, despite my determination to maintain dignity. This was Stephanie's cue. She leaned forward, perfectly manicured hands clasped on the table, ready to deliver what felt like a prepared presentation. Agnes? She began, never having called me mom, or even mother. We've compiled a comprehensive list of concerns. What followed was a methodical dismantling of my worth as a mother and grandmother. My holiday traditions were too simple and embarrassingly provincial compared to her family's elaborate celebrations. My home was cluttered with outdated memorabilia rather than the minimalist design their social circle appreciated. My clothes, car, and neighborhood were beneath the standards they were establishing. The children need influences that prepare them for the world they'll inhabit, Stephanie explained, as though I lived in some primitive past rather than the same modern world. Your constant references to the good old days and emphasis on emotional attachment over achievement contradict our parenting philosophy. Thomas nodded in agreement, adding, "We've purchased a home in Lakewood Heights, an exclusive gated community where homes started at $2 million. We believe a clean break would be best for everyone." The crushing details of their plan emerged with business-like efficiency. They would no longer be visiting. Contact with my grandchildren would be limited to occasional supervised interactions at their discretion. Thomas suggested I find friends my own age, rather than depend emotionally on my family. The final devastating blow came when Thomas said, "We would appreciate if you would refrain from identifying yourself as my mother in public, particularly in circles where we might share connections. You can say we're estranged if asked directly." Estranged, as if our relationship was some distant, faded connection rather than the fundamental bond that had shaped both our lives. They wanted to erase me not just from their future, but from their past as well. The dining room fell silent after Thomas finished speaking. The Christmas tree lights blinked steadily in the next room, the cheerful melody of Joy to the World, playing softly from my old CD player, created an absurd backdrop to this family execution. I looked at my son's face, searching for any trace of the boy I had raised, any flicker of doubt or regret behind his corporate mask. There was nothing but cool determination, and perhaps a hint of impatience to have this unpleasant task completed. The shock of their announcement was gradually giving way to a strange, unexpected calm. A clarity I hadn't felt in years settled over me. While Thomas and Stephanie had been planning my excommunication from the family, I had been preparing too, though I had desperately hoped my preparations would prove unnecessary. I stood slowly smoothing the holiday dress I had bought specially for this dinner. Thomas and Stephanie watched warily, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. Instead, I offered a small smile that clearly confused them. "I'll be right back," I said, simply turning toward my home office. In the quiet of my small office, I took a deep breath and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. There it was, a neatly prepared legal folder I had assembled over the past 3 months as my suspicions and fears grew. I had labeled it, "In case of emergency," but had prayed I would never need to open it. When I returned to the dining room, Thomas and Stephanie were whispering urgently to each other, falling silent when I appeared. Their eyes fixed on the folder in my hands. I suspected this might be coming. I said, my voice steadier than I expected, though I prayed I was wrong. Thomas frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The signs were there for months. The increasing distance, the critical comments, the exclusion from family events, I explained. Then last month, I ran into Stephanie's mother at the grocery store. Stephanie's face paled slightly. Her parents had notably been absent from recent family gatherings as well. Beverly mentioned you had outgrown your relationship with them too. Her exact words were social upgrade. She seemed resigned to it. I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward Thomas. It turns out this isn't the first family you've discarded when they no longer served your purposes. When I realized that, I decided to be prepared just in case. Thomas opened the folder with visible reluctance, his confident demeanor faltering for the first time. Inside were several neatly organized sections, each labeled and containing documents I had gathered over months of quiet research. The first section contained financial documents showing my significant secret savings. After Frank died, I had invested the modest insurance money, carefully building a nest egg that Thomas had no knowledge of. He had always assumed I lived paycheck to paycheck on my teacher's pension. "You have money?" Thomas asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Enough," I answered simply. The next section revealed documentation of family heirlooms, antiques and jewelry passed down through generations. Items Thomas had always assumed would eventually be his, but were legally designated in my will to go elsewhere if necessary. His eyes widened at the third section, which contained papers showing his continued financial connection to me. The Parent Plus loans I had taken out for his education loans that I still paid quietly each month, rather than burdening his early career with that debt. A legal document showing I had co-signed for his first business loan, a fact he had conveniently forgotten over the years. But it was the final section that caused all color to drain from both their faces. Photos and printed emails documenting Stephanie's inappropriate relationships with several of Thomas's business associates. Nothing explicitly incriminating, but enough to raise serious questions about professional boundaries, questions that could damage their carefully constructed social image. "Where did you get these?" Stephanie hissed, reaching for the photos. I gently placed my hand on the folder. "That's not important. What matters is that I never wanted to use any of this information. I gathered it hoping I would throw it away unused, that my fears were just an old woman's paranoia." Thomas's face had transformed from shock to anger. "You've been spying on us, collecting information like some sort of blackmailer." "No, Thomas. I've been protecting myself," I corrected calmly. "There's a difference. I never intended to share these with anyone. They're insurance, not ammunition." I closed the folder and placed my hands flat on the table. "You may reject me as family, but there are consequences to that decision that you haven't considered. Choices have outcomes, Thomas. That was one of the first lessons I taught you." Thomas jumped to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against my dining room floor. His face flushed with anger, all business composure abandoned. "This is completely unacceptable," he shouted. "You had no right to investigate our private lives or collect this information. This is invasion of privacy, maybe even illegal." I remained seated, maintaining the calm that had settled over me. Actually, all of this information was either publicly available, shared with me directly over the years, or obtained through completely legal means. Nothing here was acquired improperly. "I could sue you for this," Thomas threatened, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his bluff. "You could try," I acknowledged. "But then these documents would become part of public record. Is that what you want, Thomas, for your colleagues to learn about the loans I'm still paying, for Stephanie's interactions with your business partners to become common knowledge?" Stephanie's approach shifted suddenly, tears filling her eyes as she reached across the table toward me. "Agnes, there's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. We never meant to cut you off completely." I recognized the tactic immediately. When confrontation failed, Stephanie always resorted to tears and revisionist history. I had seen her use this manipulation on Thomas countless times over the years. "We were just trying to establish some healthy boundaries," she continued, her voice quivering perfectly. "Thomas has been under so much pressure at work, and I was just trying to protect our family unit. This whole thing was my fault, really. Thomas was just going along with what I suggested. Thomas looked at his wife in surprise, clearly not expecting to be thrown under the bus so quickly. Their united front was cracking under pressure. The children would be devastated to lose their grandmother, Stephanie added, reaching for my hand. You know how much they love you. I gently withdrew my hand from her reach. Stephanie, just minutes ago, you were listing all the reasons I'm an unsuitable influence on the children. Please don't insult my intelligence by pretending that didn't happen. For the first time that evening, I saw genuine emotion cross Thomas's face. Confusion, fear, and perhaps a glimmer of shame. He sat down heavily, looking less like a confident executive and more like a lost child. What do you want, Mom? He asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. This wasn't about what I wanted. It had never been about that. This was about respect, about the fundamental bonds of family that shouldn't be conditional on social status or convenience. I want what any parent wants, Thomas, a relationship based on mutual respect. I looked directly at both of them. I'm not interested in revenge or punishment. I'm interested in truth and dignity. I outlined my terms calmly. If they wanted to maintain any relationship with me, we would need family therapy to address the real issues beneath the surface. I would establish financial boundaries, protecting my assets and ensuring my security. There would be expectations for regular, genuine interaction with my grandchildren, not as a favor to me, but as their right to know their heritage and family history. I will always be your mother, Thomas, I said, my voice finally softening. Nothing can change that biological and emotional reality. But I respect myself too much to be treated as an embarrassing relic you can discard when inconvenient. I deserve better than that, and deep down, you know it. The tension in the room was palpable. Thomas stared at the folder, then at his wife, clearly weighing options and consequences. Stephanie was whispering urgently in his ear, her tearful act abandoned in favor of intense private persuasion. Their deliberation was interrupted by the sound of small footsteps. My youngest grandchild, 4-year-old Lily, wandered into the dining room, clutching the stuffed rabbit I had given her earlier. Daddy, is dinner over? Can I have dessert now? She asked, looking at the untouched soufflé still sitting in the center of the table. Before Thomas or Stephanie could answer, Lily spotted me and ran over, wrapping her small arms around my waist, in the spontaneous, uncomplicated way of children. Grandma, I love my bunny. I named her Hoppy. I hugged her back, feeling the simple truth in that embrace that all the adult complications couldn't erase. Thomas watched us, something shifting in his expression, as Lily whispered in my ear about the secret game she wanted to play later. In that moment, with my granddaughter's arms around me and my son witnessing our genuine connection, the family stood at a crossroads. Whatever happened next would determine not just my place in their lives, but the kind of people they were choosing to become. After their dramatic exit from my home that Christmas night, I sat alone at my dining table, surrounded by cooling food and extinguished candles. The presents I had wrapped with such hope remained under the tree, most unopened. The chocolate soufflé, which had risen perfectly, now collapsed in the center like my heart. Thomas had ushered his family out quickly after Lily's interruption, muttering vague statements about needing time to think and discussing things later. Stephanie's face had been a mask of barely contained fury as she pulled Lily away from me, the little girl's confusion evident as she was rushed into her coat and out the door. The house felt cavernous in their absence. I moved through the rooms, mechanically blowing out candles and turning off Christmas lights. In the kitchen, I stared at the mountain of dishes and leftover food, unable to summon the energy to deal with either. Instead, I sank into my armchair, Frank's old cardigan wrapped around my shoulders, and let the tears come at last. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. My sister Julie's name flashed on the screen, our scheduled check-in that I had almost forgotten. "Merry Christmas, sis," her cheerful voice called out. "How did the big dinner go?" When I couldn't immediately answer, her tone changed. "Agnes, what happened?" The whole story poured out between sobs. Thomas's announcement, Stephanie's criticism, the folder I had prepared, the uncertain ending to our confrontation. Julie listened without interrupting, only occasionally making sounds of disbelief or outrage. "I'm coming over," she declared when I finished. "No arguments. You shouldn't be alone tonight." Julie arrived 40 minutes later with leftover pie from her family dinner and a fierce, protective energy that had characterized our relationship since childhood. She helped me pack away the food, load the dishwasher, and take down the Christmas decorations I couldn't bear to look at anymore. "You did the right thing," she assured me, pouring us both small glasses of sherry. "Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. You showed tremendous courage." That night, sleeping in my sister's comforting presence on the pull-out sofa, began my healing journey. The road ahead would prove long and difficult, but I wasn't walking it alone. In the weeks that followed, silence from Thomas and his family hung heavy. No calls, no messages, no acknowledgement of what had transpired. I moved through January in a fog of grief, alternating between questioning my actions and feeling justified in my stand for dignity. Julie suggested I join a support group she had found for parents estranged from adult children. At first, I resisted, embarrassed to share my family troubles with strangers. But desperation eventually overcame pride, and I found myself sitting in a church basement with 8 other parents whose adult children had cut contact for various reasons. Listening to their stories, some similar to mine, others wildly different, provided perspective and comfort I hadn't known I needed. These weren't bad parents or terrible people. They were ordinary individuals navigating complex family dynamics, often blindsided by cultural shifts and changing expectations. Family estrangement has become almost trendy, our group facilitator explained. Social media and certain self-help movements have popularized cutting ties with family members as a form of self-care, often without attempting real communication or understanding first. Those meetings became my lifeline. Meanwhile, I began reconnecting with friends I had neglected while focusing so intensely on preserving my relationship with Thomas. My former teaching colleagues welcomed me back to monthly lunches. My neighbor Martha and I started taking evening walks together. Small steps toward rebuilding community beyond family. In February, I began volunteering at the community center, teaching literacy skills to adult learners. The work was rewarding, using my teaching background to help others while distracting me from my own troubles. I would return home tired but fulfilled, my thoughts less consumed by family heartbreak. One evening in March, I checked my email and found a message that stopped my heart. The sender was Emma H. 2016, an address I didn't recognize until I realized the birth year belonged to my granddaughter. The subject line read simply, "Hi, Grandma." The message was brief but precious. "Dear Grandma, I miss you. Mom and Dad don't know I'm writing this. Can you send me more pictures of when Dad was little? I want to see them. Love, Emma." I printed the email and slept with it under my pillow, a tangible connection to the grandchild I feared lost to me. I responded carefully, sending a few photos embedded in the email rather than attachments that might be discovered, asking gentle questions about her life without prying too deeply. Our secret correspondence continued sporadically, always initiated by Emma when she could access her tablet unsupervised. Through her innocent eyes, I glimpsed the household dynamics. Thomas was working later than ever. Stephanie was frequently attending ladies' events. The children were mostly cared for by a nanny whose primary qualification seemed to be her previous employment with a minor celebrity. Then in early April, nearly 3 months after Christmas, my phone rang with Thomas's number. My hands trembled so badly I almost couldn't answer. "Mom." His voice sounded different, strained but not cold. "Can we talk?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes' neutral territory for this tentative reconnection. When I arrived, Thomas was already seated in a corner booth, looking less polished than usual. His expensive haircut had grown out slightly, and faint shadows beneath his eyes suggested sleepless nights. "Thank you for coming," he said formally as I sat down, neither of us moving to hug or touch. Our initial conversation was stilted, focused on inconsequential topics. The unusually warm spring, a new bakery that had opened nearby, a book I had been reading. Gradually, Thomas's rigid posture softened slightly. "Stephanie's parents cut us off financially," he finally said, staring into his coffee cup. After what happened at Christmas, they learned about it somehow. They said if we could discard one set of parents, they weren't safe either." I waited silently, allowing him to continue at his own pace. "It's created some difficulties," he admitted. "The new house, the private schools, we had factored their contributions into our plans." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said genuinely. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in their struggles. Thomas looked up, surprise flickering across his face at my sympathy. "Really? Of course. You're still my son, Thomas. Your difficulties will always matter to me." Something cracked in his carefully maintained facade. "I've been thinking a lot about Christmas, about what you said, about what we said." He paused, visibly struggling. "I'm not sure how we got there." It wasn't an apology, but it was an opening, a small crack in the wall between us. We talked for over 2 hours that day, beginning the painful process of honest communication. Thomas admitted that much of the family vote had been Stephanie's idea, driven by her social ambitions and complicated relationship with her own parents. He acknowledged feeling torn between loyalty to his wife and recognition that something fundamental had been broken in our family. "Emma asks about you constantly," he confessed. "Lily cried for her Hoppy Bunny for weeks after Christmas. We told them you were traveling." We parted with no firm resolution, but a plan to meet again the following week. It was a tentative first step on an uncertain path. Over the next several months, our healing process inched forward through a series of small milestones. Thomas agreed to family therapy, though Stephanie attended reluctantly and often defensively. The therapist, Dr. Carlson, skillfully navigated the complex dynamics, creating space for difficult truths to emerge. "Families are systems," she explained in one session. "When one part of the system changes, everything else is affected. We're working to create a healthier system for everyone." Through these sessions, I came to understand Thomas's perspective better. His complex feelings about his upbringing, his desire to provide his children with advantages he hadn't had, his struggle to reconcile his past with his present ambitions. Thomas began to see how Stephanie's influence had gradually isolated him from his roots, how her vision of success required discarding parts of himself he once valued. Stephanie herself slowly revealed her deep insecurities beneath the perfect facade, her fear that without wealth and status, she had nothing of value to offer. The first time I was invited to their home for dinner, a tentative Sunday lunch in June, felt like crossing an invisible threshold. The children's genuine excitement at seeing me couldn't be contained by Stephanie's attempts at maintaining formality. Lily ran to me immediately, asking if I had brought Hoppy Bunny to visit his mommy. By fall, we had established a new rhythm. I saw the grandchildren twice monthly sometimes, with Thomas present occasionally with the entire family. Stephanie remained guarded but civil, her hostility gradually replaced by cautious coexistence. The folder from Christmas was never mentioned again, though its shadow remained as unspoken acknowledgement of boundaries that wouldn't be crossed again. When Christmas approached again, I felt the old anxiety rising. Would we attempt a family holiday? Should I suggest it, or wait for them to take the lead? Thomas called in early December. "We're thinking of trying something different this year," he said. "Not your house or ours, but neutral ground. Julie suggested we could all gather at her lake house." "I'd like that," I said, surprised and touched that he had reached out to my sister independently. "Mom," he added before hanging up, I'm sorry about last Christmas. I was wrong. We were wrong. The simple acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. Not because it erased the hurt, nothing could do that completely, but because it represented growth that had seemed impossible a year earlier. Our Christmas at Julie's lake house wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments and old tensions that surfaced occasionally. The expensive gifts Stephanie brought made my handmade offerings seem humble by comparison. But there was laughter, two genuine moments of connection, and no one announced family membership revocations during dinner. As I watched Thomas helping his children build a snowman outside Julie's picture window, I reflected on everything the past year had taught me. Standing up for myself hadn't been easy or comfortable, but it had been necessary. Not just for me, but ultimately for Thomas and the children as well. The relationship we were rebuilding wasn't the one I had imagined all those years as a young mother. It was more complicated, more conscious, requiring ongoing effort from all sides. But it was authentic in a way our previous interactions had not been built on respect rather than obligation or habit. More importantly, I had discovered my own resilience. My identity and worth existed independently of my role as Thomas's mother. Through my volunteer work, friendships, and personal interests, I had created a life with meaning beyond family connections. That knowledge gave me strength and perspective that actually made me a better mother and grandmother, one who could love without desperate attachment. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and others, is to refuse to participate in your own diminishment. By standing firm in my self-respect that Christmas night, I had ultimately given my son the chance to find his way back to authentic family connection. Not perfect, not always easy, but real. And in the end, that's the only gift that truly matters. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family members who took you for granted? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Remember that self-respect isn't selfish. It's essential for healthy relationships. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for spending this time with me, and remember, it's never too late to set loving boundaries and honor your own worth. Your future self will thank you.